Of the Pack Podcast.
Experience the thrill of a Packers game at Lambeau Field? If so, be sure to get your game ticket from the longtime trusted source in Wisconsin, Ticket King. Visit their locations in Milwaukee and Green Bay, or just go to their website at ticketking.com. Again, that's at ticketking.com.
Well, hello, everybody, and this is the second time you have heard me in the span of about 4 days. Welcome to Pulse of the Pack, a special NFC Championship version of this show. I am your host, Jacob Westendorf. It is Thursday night as we record. I have made it somehow to almost Friday. I can't remember the last time over a 2-week span that I've been this nervous for a couple of football games, but I've made it. Join with me as always, and we've got a packed show tonight. Also, the first time, 2 hours. We have a 2-hour show tonight for you. Jason Perone is with me for all 2 hours, and we got a couple guests that will join us as well. I'll tell you about them in a minute. But Jason, before we get to that, how the hell are you, my friend?
Well, the hell, man, I'm doing great. And, 2 hours of Jason Perone is not always a treat for everybody. I know this, but I'm excited that we have a show to do because that means the Packers won their last game in dramatic fashion. We talked about that on our last show earlier this week. Jacob, you had a fantastic idea, and you said, you know what, to hell with it, man. Let's do another show and break down Atlanta. See if we can get some friends to come on the show. We've got a couple of really good friends that are going to come on and help us break down this game, one of which you have heard from before. We love that support. We absolutely appreciate it. I am excited just to have this to talk about, and we've got a lot to chat about, and Upbeat Lollipop has been in effect this week. Jacob, you've received text messages from me. I hope that you saved every single one of them so that we can do, if we have time in our extended show, to do another edition of What Were You Thinking? And if there's ever been a teeter-totter or a back-and-forther, it is me. So, Jacob, you put up with it very well. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. It's good to be back, and let's talk about an NFC Championship game, man. This team is one step away from Super Bowl LI.
That they are, is the way they put it in 2010. They are 8 quarters away. 2010, they obviously counted down from 16 all the way to 0 when they hoisted the Lombardi Trophy for the 4th time. They're down to 8 quarters. They have a date with the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday at 2:05. It'll be the final game played in the Georgia Dome. The Falcons dispatched the Seattle Seahawks rather easily. The Packers, we talked about that on our last show, beat the Dallas Cowboys in dramatic fashion. I gotta tell you, Jason, Monday was phenomenal for me at work. I work with a couple Cowboys fans, and I could not stop. I hope my boss isn't listening to this show, but I could not stop watching Mason Crosby make that field goal. I could not stop watching Jared Cook catch the ball on the sideline. I could not stop watching Aaron Rodgers make that throw. It was as good of a game as I can remember, and I'm sure when we get to the summer there will be times for this, but I want to talk about where this game, once we can finally remove the emotion, where this game ranks in all time as far as sweet victories for the Packers. Hopefully, what we're hoping for is that it really is, though, just a footnote on a Super Bowl run. And in order to do that, they have to beat the Atlanta Falcons. And since we last talked, which was on Sunday, there have been some updates to the injury report. And first and foremost, there are some concerns. Davante Adams and Geronimo Allison have been added to the injury report. Adams with an ankle injury and Allison with a hamstring injury. And Jordy Nelson obviously still with a rib injury. But Jordy Nelson is the one that, depending on the reports you read, and we'll talk more about these as we go on here, but depending on the reports you read, Jordy Nelson is the one that is the least likely to play, and he is the one that is doing the most in practice. So it's kind of strange to go through these things. The only thing I can think of, Jason, if we're going to go with the what were you thinking theme, is those, like, evangelicals or Jehovah's Witnesses with the suits and stuff that knock on the doors and always ask, have you heard the good news? The only thing I could think of when I read the injury report is, like, reading all those receivers on the list is somebody, like, knocking on the door, handing me a copy of that injury report, and it's seeing all these people from the offseason telling me about how bad Davante Adams is and how good Jeff Janis is, and just telling me, have you heard the good news about our Lord and Savior, Janis Christ? That's all I could think of for the last 2 days, and maybe that's not as funny as I thought it was, but I thought it was really funny. But that's kind of the injury update on the offensive side of things. On defense, the concern is Morgan Burnett. Morgan Burnett has not participated the last 2 days in practice. We'll see if he can go on a quadricep injury. Got hurt in the first series against the Cowboys. The good news is on the defensive side of things, or maybe it's bad news, I'm not really sure, I guess, but the Packers were able to win without him, and he only played one series. So they slowed down the Cowboys, I guess, for the early portion of the game without Morgan Burnett. Now, what we'll talk about as we get to the matchups portion of this show is the Falcons' offense is a different animal than anything the Packers have faced on defense during this stretch. But from the injury side of things, this Packers team is banged up. And reportedly, you know, some of these guys are a long shot to play. Some guys are expected to play. Reality is, I don't really know what is going on. And the other bit of news, and this is kind of off the field, but it's for me to kind of say I told you so. Elliott Wolf, Packers Director of Football Operations and son of former Hall of Fame General Manager Ron Wolf, has pulled out of consideration for the 49ers General Manager job. Now, the only reason I bring that up during the NFC Championship game show is to say, I told you guys, he was never going to take that job. I was never worried. I know a lot of people think that he's going to be the next general manager and really want him to be the next general manager. And I think that this new deal that he got in Green Bay, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but it sure feels like that's going to solidify it, that he's going to be the guy. And it feels more and more like he's the heir apparent to Ted Thompson, but was never too concerned. We'll see what happens with Brian Gutekunst, if he's the guy that becomes the general manager in San Francisco, because his name is still in consideration there. But Elliott Wolf is not there, and it looks as if with the new deal that he received, he is the heir apparent in Green Bay. So, Jason, a lot there. Let's talk about some of the updates real quick, though. So, Davante Adams and Geronimo Allison, we knew about Jordy Nelson, but those two were a slight bit of a surprise just because Adams finished the game against the Cowboys, and Allison, he wasn't even mentioned in the injury update by Mike McCarthy. So how surprised were you to see those two guys added to the injury report? Not only that, just to see that they haven't even participated in the first 2 days of practice this week.
That they haven't participated is more concerning to me because Adams did finish the game, so you assume that, okay, you have to report his injury because that's the rule. He's got some sort of an injury. What I heard also, and I don't recall who it was from, I think it might have been Jason Wilde earlier this week, was that Adams went back out there after he hurt his ankle and was able to play because he was playing on pure adrenaline. On Monday when he woke up, it was an entirely different story with the ankle. So I don't know what that situation is going to look like. Jacob, you made a valid point when you asked which Davante Adams was going to show up. Is it going to be last year's version? Is it going to be this year's version? Because if it's last year's, when he had the ankle injury, he was terrible. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he can't be good this year. He's been a much better receiver, and maybe this year the confidence, the chemistry with Rodgers, and just another year under his belt will help him still contribute. But like I said before we started the show, the last thing I said to you before we went live was, if these guys can be out there and play, this is the NFC Championship game. This team came back from the dead to get to this point. They've won 8 straight games, and They've got 2 more in front of them, and they've got a very winnable game against the Atlanta Falcons, who are a great team. But these 2 teams match up well. I talk about matchups all the time. I think the Packers have a great shot here, but they're going to need all their horses. Now, Jordy Nelson, I agree with you. I don't think Nelson's going to play. I'm very encouraged to hear that he's trying to be out there. And you know what? Don't be surprised if you see Nelson suit up in this game because, you know, when I went to the Seattle game, there were a lot of guys that were dinged up, and I expected that I wasn't going to see. And all of a sudden, I see Jaron Elliott is suited up. I see Nick Perry come out of the tunnel. I see Blake Martinez in uniform. Those guys were all dinged up and had pretty decent injuries at the time, and so I was like, this is incredible. You know, these guys are all suited up. I can't believe it. You know, the Packers have always been so conservative with injuries that it just takes forever to get guys back, but obviously they don't have that luxury right now. This is the playoffs, and they have one game, do or die, and then their season's over, and it's catastrophic because they're not going to the championship game, which is every team's goal, and there's going to be a lot of very disappointed fans and players around the league. Geronimo Allison was more of a surprise just because the hamstring wasn't something anybody knew about, and a hamstring injury is nothing to mess around with. You never know what the severity is. You don't know where the hamstring injury is. Is it a high hamstring? Is it a low hamstring? I mean, the only thing he's got going for him is that he's a young guy, and younger guys tend to bounce back, and they also have some of the best sports medicine available in the world. So my guess is that he'll be out there. But they're going to need these guys. They're going to need Adams. They're going to need Allison. You know, you mentioned Janice Christ, and that was actually funny, Jacob. I was on mute, but I was laughing. I chuckled just in case you wanted a credit for it. I definitely chuckled. But let's be real here. This isn't Arizona last season. This is the NFC Championship game in Atlanta, and the Falcons are going to come ready to rock and roll. And even though their defense and their secondary isn't the best in the world, they're not lighting the world on fire, they're going to have a plan to cover these guys. So you're not going to get by with substituting out Davante Adams, Geronimo Allison, and Jordy Nelson with Trevor Davis and Jeff Janis, and maybe even throwing Ty Montgomery out there. I mean, Jared Cook had a great game last year, so Cook's going to be a more focal point. You got Richard Rodgers. You know, do you throw more passes to Ripkowski? It's just not the same. So it's Thursday. We're getting closer to game day, so as each day moves along, it's a little bit more nerve-wracking, but you kind of have to hope also maybe there's a little bit of gamesmanship that's going on right now. So we'll see.
And that really is the biggest concern is, you know, if this was a game that you expected to be a defensive struggle similar to what 2010 was, you know, when they played the Bears and the final score of that game was 21-14, and the Packers only scored 14 points on offense in that game. Another 7 came from a B.J. Raji pick 6 off of Caleb Haney. If the game was like that, I'm not going to say missing the receivers wouldn't be a big deal because obviously it would, but not as big of a deal. But this game is expected to be a track meet. And you're talking about needing to score. And this is even if the Packers had a good defense, and they don't, but even if they had a good one, I mean, they would still probably, at least in my opinion, have to score 30-some-odd points. We'll see what happens as far as, you know, Davante Adams and Geronimo Allison go, and Jordy Nelson for that matter. Like I said, Nelson practicing is an encouraging sign. And, you know, something about the NFL, the one thing you always got to remember is gamesmanship is a thing, and the deeper you get into the postseason, the more I believe that is a thing. Jordy Nelson is practicing in limited fashion. That could mean he's closer to playing. That could mean that he has no chance of playing Sunday, and the Packers are just saying that, and they're throwing him a couple passes because he's capable of doing that, and that's all he's capable of doing, and they're messing with him. Ian Rappaport reported that they expect Davante Adams and Geronimo Allison to play on Sunday. We'll see what happens there. The good news from Rob Demovsky today was that Davante Adams' ankle sprain was not as bad as the one that hindered him all of last year, which is good news because Davante Adams we saw last year on that ankle sprain was not good. And the Packers, listen, they need Davante Adams to play well in this game. They're going to need Randall Cobb. You mentioned Jared Cook. The good news is, even more so, even if they get one of those guys or two of those guys, even in a limited capacity, they still have a lot of weapons, and they still have Aaron Rodgers. But they need those receivers because this is still going to be a shootout. And even on the Packers' defense's best possible day, on Sunday. I still believe that the Falcons could score 20 or so points. We now have a guest joining our show. He's been with us before. I consider him a friend of the show because he's been with us so often. And I want to start by saying he taught us probably the most important lesson that you can learn this season, in that Justis Mosqueda, the NFC North, is a cautionary tale in which the moral of the story is that it is not how you start, but rather
how you run the table, baby. How you run the table.
Correct. How you run the table. And the Packers have run the table to this point. Justis, welcome to the show. Is your power back? I know I don't envy you this week.
Yeah.
With your power going out, and you got all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, I've seen snow or ice every single day since November, and I can't wait to go to the Senior Bowl next week if I could figure out a way how to get on the highway that's currently closed. But yeah, I mean we're doing fine power back, so we're good money here.
Okay, we got the power back, so that is good news. It was a concern about an hour ago, maybe two, before the show was going, so a little dicey situation here, but we are back, and Justis is here. And Justis, I got to say, I envy you from the fact that you are going to the Senior Bowl. I do not envy the fact that your flight is leaving and that you are landing, I believe, 2 hours after the game kicks off, or what's the situation there for Sunday?
Yeah, I basically, I get to Chicago in the fourth quarter, or at least I'm planning to. I don't know how this ice is going to work out and all that, but basically I should be landing with into the fourth quarter, 10 minutes left of the game. So heart attacks will be had as I check my phone, dropping down to Chicago.
Oh, my goodness. I don't envy that at all. The flight has to be even – I don't know if you're a fearful flyer, but if you are, adding the anxiety of not being able to know the score probably doesn't help.
That's worse, honestly. Yeah, that's the worst part. I hate flying not because I hate heights. I'm cool with heights. I just don't like being cramped up in a space like that for that long of time. And, because it feels like a prison to me. I hate it. And not being able to check the Packers score on a football Sunday when they're in the NFC Championship game, not fun. That makes it even worse.
Not fun at all. But let's start with the NFC Championship game. We were just talking about how the wide receivers are pretty banged up. 4 out of the 6 guys are listed on the injury report. Jeff Janis is kind of a formality as listed on the injury report because he's a full participant. But 3 of those 6, if you include those guys, so Geronimo Allison, Davante Adams, and Jordy Nelson are listed on the injury report. How confident are you that Green Bay will be able to score points against this Atlanta defense with a compromised receiving core?
I think they'll be able to do it, if nothing else. This is the weird thing. What we're seeing with Aaron Rodgers is almost like what we saw with Johnny Manziel his freshman year at Texas A&M, where you're seeing a mobile quarterback whose arm and legs are able to get him into a weird situation where basically he's able to call his own plays halfway through a play, right? And that really only works if you trust offensive linemen and if they're better than anyone that they line up against, right? So, Johnny Manziel had 2 first-round picks in Luke Joeckel and then Jake Matthews, who's going to end up starting at left tackle for the Atlanta Falcons this week, right? And Luke Joeckel, I believe, went, 2nd overall or 3rd overall to Jacksonville Jaguars when he came out. Green Bay kind of has the same type of situation. We do work at Bleacher Report with the NFL 1000 crew, and basically I think Brian Bulaga was the 2nd-ranked right tackle in our season-long scouting, and I think David Bakhtiari was our 4th-ranked left tackle. So Green Bay really trusts their tackles a lot. Almost in a way that they basically get no help on the outside. It's basically, okay, you guys got it. We're isolating you guys on their pass rushers. And basically they've been able to shut everyone down this entire season between that and Aaron Rodgers being able to move around in the pocket. Atlanta already lost Derek Shelby to the injured reserve list, and they just lost Adrian Claiborne to the injured reserve list. And I grade pass rushers for the NFL 1000 team on Bleacher Report. And basically I can tell you at the top, Dwight Freeney is there, but Dwight Freeney is a pass rusher who is on limited reps and is about to turn, I believe, 37 years old in the next month. And there's a reason why he has limited reps. And the only other 2 pass rushers that they use significantly are Vic Beasley, who, obviously good, I believe he led the NFL in sacks this season, and then Brooks Reed, who is not that good. So basically, it's with Atlanta's scheme. Basically, they like to play a lot of one high because they're a cover 3 team. They're totally different than what Dallas did, and Dallas kind of figured out Green Bay by sending that slot blitzer, right? Because that slot blitzer is faster than these offensive tackles, and he's a guy who can actually bring down Aaron Rodgers. Maybe not bring him down, but a guy who can stop him doing that little shimmy shake and then roll out, right? Atlanta's not really going to be able to do that if they're playing single high safeties instead of 2 high safeties because you're not able to really disguise your coverage like that. And when you play single high, you really have to rely on your 4 pass rushers beating their 5 guys in pass protection. And the way it looks like on paper, Atlanta's not going to be able to do that. So I think this still has shootout elements to it.
Oh, Justis, it's Jason. Welcome back, man. It's good to talk to you. You always have the best things to say to calm the high blood pressure, because right before you came on, we were talking about some of the challenges here, but this is one of the reasons why we want to have you on, is because you're able to kind of break that down. And actually, before I go in to my next question, as we usually like to do, because we get new listeners all the time, can you just remind everybody how to find you on Twitter, and then just kind of I know you're going to the Senior Bowl, so talk a little bit about how you get to do that and why, and then where our folks can find your work.
Yeah, so I coached football on the line, so people follow me for draft takes. I kind of stumbled into a job basically with Bleacher Report a couple years ago covering the Packers, and then that ended up turning into writing about gambling, the NFL draft, and now evaluating pass rushers for the NFL 1000 project that we started up this year. You can find me on Twitter at JUMOSQ. Yeah, I'm going to be down at the Senior Bowl. I might be at the Combine, so if you guys want some looks at that, probably have my eyes on line play the entire time that I'm down there. I know we're looking at receivers and cornerbacks, but I'm sticking to what I know.
Awesome. You know what I want to ask you, too? How did your football season end up? I know you coach a team, so how did everything go?
Oh, man. We went winless. We went winless after going to the playoffs last year. But it was kind of something that we expected. Basically, the freshman team that I kind of helped coach up 2 years ago ended up being the starting varsity team this year. I think we lose 1 starter. So we knew it was going to be a rebuilding season coming in.
So you basically were the Kentucky, except there was nobody recruiting anybody else to come in, and all your freshmen left, right?
Yeah, there weren't a bunch of 5-star recruits coming into Hood River, Oregon to play football for me. It's kind of unfortunate. I got to hit the road.
Yeah, well, congrats again on being able to go to the Senior Bowl. I know that's a big honor, and you kind of get to rub elbows with a lot of people that know a lot of things about the folks that are coming in, and because of that, we're definitely going to ask you to come back on when we start talking about the draft and some of the prospects, as we usually do, because you've always got some great insight there. But kind of circling back to the game here, obviously this year Ty Montgomery transitioned to the running back role, as well as could be expected, considering he started the year as a wide receiver. The story was that he actually went to Coach Mike McCarthy and said, hey, throw me in the backfield. I want to be a running back. I can do this, even though that he was drafted as a receiver and was a kick returner as well. So he stepped into that role, and he's actually done pretty well. I was watching actually the Chicago game over again, and some of the nifty moves that he put on. And I know Chicago's defense isn't all that great, and they probably weren't playing with a ton of pride at that point. But, that long run that he had, he probably could have been stuffed for a loss. He turns it into a long gain. So, Atlanta's ranked 30th in DVOA against the run. So do you see running the ball and Ty Montgomery being a big key this week?
Yeah. The only thing that I worry about is Atlanta likes to load that box because they drop that safety. It's very similar. It's a very similar scheme to what Seattle does, right? And that shouldn't be a surprise because Dan Quinn, their head coach, comes from that Pete Carroll defensive coaching tree. And basically, ideally they play with an 8-man box with that drop safety as opposed to Dallas, right, where I talked about where they play split high safeties, and there's basically 7 men in the box. So that's a little different. I think Ty Montgomery is going to be a huge factor in this game because if they have to start, if it goes full shootout mode and they have to come from behind, I wonder how much he splits out at receiver and then Kristen Michael or Aaron Ripkowski end up playing in the backfield. I know we saw Aaron Ripkowski do some stuff in the backfield in recent weeks, even against Dallas this past week. The one thing that does worry me is Ty Montgomery in pass protection. I think that's something that's kind of shown up in the past couple weeks.
Definitely agree there. Listeners listening in here, you'll hear my bit on Ty Montgomery here at the end of the show when we talk here. But Ty Montgomery, big key for the offense this week. But, Justis, the reason I started following you was because of your takes on edge defenders. And the Packers' edge defenders, in my opinion, the last 2 weeks have been relatively quiet. Now, I'll give them a little bit of a
Clay
pass.
Matthews became a meme. Clay Matthews became a meme. So
yeah,
not necessarily quiet, but not necessarily what you want either.
Not for the good reasons, yeah. Clay Matthews he got put in the spin cycle by Zeke Elliott, who, like I said, he lives to torment you guys. You see why? But I'll give him a slight bit of a pass because they played the Cowboys. I guess I'll give him a little bit there. But I don't think that they'll be able to rush the passer the way that they did against the Giants and the Cowboys and keep the Falcons off the scoreboard, because the Falcons offense, if you go back through this Packers run-the-table streak, the Falcons are far and away the best offense they have faced. And I don't know that it's particularly close. So I say all that to say, which edge defender for the Packers, one, do you expect to, and two, has to have the best week for the Packers to be successful on defense this week?
I think it's going to have to be Nick Perry, because he might be the best one out of the bunch at this point, right? Like if we're just talking strictly of who's had a better 2016, I think it's Nick Perry petting his evil cast. Like, I think that's probably how it goes. I think in the passing game, if you want to shut down Atlanta's passing game, I really do think that this game, I think it'll have more to do with the back end than it will have to do with the front end getting pressure. Because I think even against Dak Prescott almost threw like 5 interceptions in that game. It was just that Green Bay wasn't able to close and steal a lot of those, other than that Micah Hyde interception, right? I think there were opportunities
out of Prescott as well.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, like it's very – Green Bay had a shot to get Dallas off the field, and getting them off the field is a victory as much as scoring offensively is. I know that applies to everything, but in shootouts, stealing the possession is going to be incredibly important. I don't think getting a team into 3rd and 2 getting them consistently into 3rd and 2s and making them have to convert 3rd downs isn't necessarily how you want to play teams like Dallas and Atlanta, where they're clearly better on offense than you are on defense. You're out here trying to be aggressive and steal possessions. You want interceptions and sacks, because that's what gets the punt team on the field, or it gets your offense on the field, right? And I think Green Bay had opportunities last week, and they weren't able to close. And if they're able to close this week, I think that defensively is what swings it in their favor if they do end up coming out with a win.
And I think that, and I told Jacob this too, I think that the Packers are kind of ripe. Ladarius Gunter, for some reason, is a guy that I just think is due for a big play, and he hasn't made it yet, and he's had some pretty good games. I mean, he almost had a big interception against the Falcons the first time they played. It would have been a tough play, but this is the week that he finally does it. So I kind of almost have a follow-up question to Jacobs about edge defender, because earlier you mentioned Dwight Freeney on Atlanta's side, and
right.
I harp on the fact that the Packers tend to have trouble with these guys that are kind of in the waning years of their career, but somehow they end up having great games against Green Bay, and it's frustrating. You look at Larry Fitzgerald, although Fitzgerald's not that old. You look at, you've got a Dwight Freeney. I think Freeney, when he was with the Cardinals, I think he had a good game against the Packers, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Jason Witten had the touchdown last week. Anquan Bolden always seems to play well.
Jason
These guys
Witten's first playoff touchdown. Jason Witten's first playoff touchdown somehow.
Yeah, that's amazing, and but that's and it's always the Packers that seem to kind of be the team that get in the stat book that way, and that's not what we want, obviously. But Julius Peppers, you mentioned Freeney's age. Julius Peppers is an aging guy too, and the Packers have tried to be smart this year with his snap count. Are you the type of guy that thinks that there's anything to the fact that Peppers, first of all, added rest, never, always available, never on the injury report somehow. I mean, the guy's missed you can count the number of games he's missed in his career on one hand and have fingers left over. And, and he's coming in fresh, but he understands what's in front of him. He had, they were 2 minutes away from in 2014. He knows he doesn't have that many years left. Are you the type that believes that Julius Peppers is primed to step up, and would you be surprised if he just goes total beast mode in this game?
Well, I do think that he if anything else, he could be one of those guys. Him, even certain guys like Mike Daniels and like Clint Dix. If nothing else, I know it's kind of cliche to talk about from like a leader perspective, right? But those are guys who had to go through the emotional swings of several playoff games where they've been down huge points and then ended up coming up, or they've been up and let go of a lead. Like those are the guys who could tell you to calm the hell down, right? Because I can't remember if it was or Morgan who ended up getting the interception against Seattle, but Julius Peppers was the guy who told him to go down. Remember? He was the guy who told him, go down, and we're going to end up running the clock. Like, I think Julius Peppers, if nothing else, him, Mike Daniels, and like, those are the three guys who are like, no, gas pedal to the floor. Like, we are not letting up at all. We have seen this go wrong.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think that was obviously a catastrophic mistake, one of several that happened in that particular game. So, I'm kind of hoping to see a big game from 56 this week, because I think, they obviously get the pressure on Matt Ryan, and he can make some mistakes. And when he makes mistakes, you see things like you saw in in 2010 where Tremont gets that nice pick six at the end of the half, and things like that. Like you said, steal possession, steal points. That's how you win these games. But we were talking about some of the receivers who are dinged up, and we don't know what their availability is going to be. So on the defensive side, you've got Morgan Burnett, who's got this quad injury. And if for some reason he can't go, which would be tough because Morgan Burnett's been such a versatile player back there, I think he's had his best season. He's really embraced that role as a leader. He's been very sound in his pass coverage. He had the nice interception against the Seahawks, and he's been great in run support. So do you picture Kentrell Bryce kind of being able to jump in and play that hybrid safety linebacker type role that neutralizes the pass-catching abilities of like a Freeman and a Coleman? I mean, he's a young guy, so, I mean, you worry about is he sound in his study and where he's going to be, because Bryce just seems to be the kind of guy that wants to play with a ton of piss and vinegar and go knock the snot out of somebody, which is great. But do you think he can fill in that role if Burnett is out?
That's one thing that I would worry about is that and Kyle Shanahan, because Kyle Shanahan will throw absolutely everything. Like, when people talk about Kyle Shanahan being the best offensive coordinator in football, they aren't lying to you, and there's a reason why he's had success basically every single stop that he's had. Just little things, like we'll probably see a tight end throwback 2 or 3 times in this coming game that'll just come out of nowhere, and, like, the entire defense will be like, what the hell? Like, we saw that on film, but you just, like, never expect it. Like, somehow he knows how to get you into a rhythm and then just completely disrupt it, like in one play, and just kind of like shake you to your core. So like a guy like Bryce, who's so aggressive like that, especially when Green Bay is going in too high, so often right now, because they're trying to help their receivers or their cornerbacks, right? They're trying to give them extra cushion and at least giving the offense the look pre-snap of, hey, we have safety help, please don't throw it deep. If they're able to get a guy like Bryce just flying upfield off of play action, I think that could be a bad thing, especially considering who we have outside right now.
All right, Justice. The matchups are over ultimately at 5:40, and then at 9 o'clock, because we'll ask about the AFC as well. I don't really care about the breakdown on that. But at 5:40, who's holding the George S. Halas Trophy?
Man, gun to my head, I think Atlanta's got a shot. You mean to tell me you go through all this stuff
about how Aaron Rodgers is the MVP and Matt Ryan isn't, and you're going to take the Atlanta Falcons?
It's a team game. I'll take the Atlanta odds. I'll take the Atlanta odds, but I'm not writing off Aaron Rodgers. Look, here's one thing: is we got to control this narrative at least. Like, if we want to play the whole, like, we're massive underdogs heading up into this, we could pretty much clinch a Disney contract after this game. So, If we want to control this little narrative here, get Aaron. I was asking someone who plays Aaron Rodgers in the Disney remake of this season. Someone said Jordan Rodgers. I don't know about that, but
I read
hey,
that.
look, this is some storybook stuff.
Okay, Justice. Real quick, I'll explain why you're wrong in a minute. But who wins the AFC Championship game?
I think it's Brady. I mean, how often have we seen Ben Roethlisberger against Brady, and just Brady come out with it? I mean, the AFC is pretty predictable. I mean, you guys have probably seen all these stats where it's like, I think it says 2002 or 2003. Yeah, it's like Rich Gannon and Joe Flacco had 1 year, and then everyone else is like, you can pretty much like, I'm gonna I write about gambling for Bleacher Report. I'm gonna go ahead and say this. This year, when the Super Bowl odds open up, just take New England and take Pittsburgh, and that's it. Because one of those teams is coming out of the AFC.
Yeah. If you take out 2002, you are one 70-yard bomb to Jacoby Jones away from it just being Brady Manning Roethlisberger in the Super Bowl for the AFC. But here's why you're wrong, Justice. I refuse to believe that you and Ian Kenyon have sat on this mantle for 3 weeks about how Aaron Rodgers is the MVP and that there's a Disney movie contract that we're discussing that Jordan Rodgers will play Aaron Rodgers in this movie, about how the Packers run the table after he says they run the table, only for him to lose to the guy that he probably loses the MVP to in the first place. So, Packers are going to win on Sunday, and you are going to be wrong.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope the hell I'm wrong. Look, listen, if I drop down in Chicago and Green Bay's anything more than – if Green Bay's 8 points up, I drop down in Chicago, I'm going to lose 5,000 followers. Like, I'm just going to eviscerate and just drop a bomb on the entire timeline. So if that happens, look, I will be the happiest guy on earth.
I can't wait.
You'll still have at least 20,000 more followers than Jacob and I combined.
I'll toss some of your guys' way. I'll make sure to tell them to follow you guys when we get off.
We appreciate that, Justice. Thanks for coming on. Obviously, we'll talk to you when the draft comes by, even though you did just pick the Falcons. But appreciate you coming on. You're welcome anytime on this show. Follow him, guys, on Twitter. It's @JUMOSQ. He's heading down to the Senior Bowl. So when the Packers season ends and they are hopefully picking 32nd, he'll have some draft prospects for you for them to be looking at that spot and then some other slots in the draft as well. So, Justice, thanks for coming on. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Anytime.
Thanks, Justice.
That is Justis Mosqueda of Bleacher Report. So that was fun. And just for the hell of it, we're going to have another guest here in about 20 minutes or so. We are only 40 minutes into our 2-hour show. But, Jason, did Justis say anything that really stuck out to you there?
Well, he picked Atlanta, so that stuck out to me in a very bad way. I didn't love that at all. And it was almost like the total heel turn there, and it was, it kind of reminded me of I don't know, the lead up to the drama shows and the soap operas, and then all of a sudden the complete opposite of what you expect to happen ends up happening. Kind of like how The Bachelor or Bachelorette ended with Jordan Rodgers winning, which was kind of strange because we all thought it was going to be somebody else. So I thought I'd throw that reference in there since we were talking about that a few minutes ago, but. It was just really funny, Jacob. You made a great point. Justice gave us all these reasons why the Packers could make this thing happen. They're obviously going to have to play what sounded like kind of a near-perfect game. They're going to have to make sure they take care of – the biggest thing was they have to take advantage of every single opportunity that's thrown their way. I mean, I over-dramatize everything, and I am the king of hyperbole. And so – if a Packers defender drops an interception, you can count on Upbeat Lollipop tweeting out and saying, okay, here comes the touchdown, because you know how this goes. Packers player drops interception, opponent scores touchdown, totally dramatic 7-point swing, and then the game is over, they're going to lose. So that was probably my biggest takeaway was that, he thinks it can happen, but it sounds like the Packers are going to have to play extremely sound, take advantage of every single opportunity that comes their way, which is very true. He made a very valid point.
Isn't that almost always how the NFC Championship game is too, though? I mean, if you think about it, 2014, the Packers had, 2 opportunities in the red zone. They kicked field goals. They had opportunities to put that game away several times, and they didn't do it. This game's no different. The Falcons, they're not a juggernaut, but they're a very good football team, and the Packers are going to have to play a really good game to win this one. The thing that stuck out to me, I've been following him all week because I thought it was interesting. One, not just his breakdown of how the Packers played, but, kind of his breakdown of the opponents as well. And for those of you that kind of missed his breakdown of Dak Prescott, he said, Dak Prescott could have thrown 4 or 5 interceptions is what he said on Sunday, and the Packers didn't really close or, he had the opportunities to make plays on the ball, and they didn't. And, if you just listen to ESPN or NFL Network, and some of these guys are, they're Cowboys apologists, and I get it. That is what it is. But, narratives don't always follow what actually happened on the field, and you think that Dak Prescott was flawless, and that wasn't the case. I thought that was interesting. I always like Justis for his X's and O's stuff. The things he was saying about Nick Perry having to have a big game. Julius Peppers, those things, him discussing, how certain individuals specifically, Mike Daniels, Clinton Dix, Morgan Burnett, have kind of been through the ups and downs of blowing leads in the playoffs or being down big and coming back, just those emotional swings and kind of knowing to keep the pedal to the floor for this game. And that's something I can guarantee. If the Packers get a lead in this game, I really think that they'll have learned their lesson from 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I was reminded by the internet yesterday that yesterday was, the anniversary of one of the saddest days that I've ever had, the Seattle game, obviously. And I think that is a learning experience for this time around. If the Packers get a lead, they know, you don't run, punt, and you keep the pedal to the floor, and you keep playing offense, or you keep playing defense. Go score a touchdown if you get an interception, things like that. So a lot of interesting stuff from Justis. We appreciate him coming on and talking with us, as he always does, and I'll definitely look forward to the draft when it comes that time. But now it's not time to talk about the draft. And believe me, there will be plenty of time for that, but hopefully not for 3 more weeks, because I still want to talk about football, and I really want to talk about the NFC Championship game, and I really want to talk about the Super Bowl. The first thing I want to start with, Jason, this is going to be a matchup show. Jason, you always say football is a game of matchups, so I dedicated this show specifically to you. Matchups on offense. Packers offensive tackles against the pass rushers of the Atlanta Falcons. And Justis pointed to this specifically. This is a big thing for the Packers because with hobbled wide receivers, I think they're going to need that time in the pocket or outside of the pocket. But the other good news is really outside of Vic Beasley, with guys banged up, they just lost Adrian Claiborne. Dwight Freeney is older and maybe doesn't have that much gas left in the tank. And Brooks Reed, Justis said, isn't that good. So the Packers have a distinct advantage in the passing game as far as protection goes. Jason, how big of an advantage do you think that is going into Sunday's game?
It's a big question mark because it's gonna depend on the health of those wide receivers. But I take Aaron Rodgers over Matt Ryan. I take Aaron Rodgers over anybody else right now. So offensively, especially with the offensive line, those guys are absolute. I don't want to call them the Hogs because the Hogs were the Washington Redskins of the 80s, 70s, and they were the originals. But these guys are always available. They fight through injuries. They're a tough bunch, and they're an extremely good bunch. I mean, you saw how well that they were able to protect Aaron Rodgers last week, and they were going up against a unit on the other side, although they don't go against each other, in Dallas's offensive line that's been given the best offensive line label for at least the last 2 or 3 seasons. So, offensively, Aaron Rodgers can make a star out of anybody. And if it does have to be Jeff Janis and Trevor Davis, you know what? Reminder, both of those guys scored touchdowns the first time that they played the Falcons. So I'm not saying that all of a sudden they're going to show up and light the world on fire. I think Atlanta's going to have a good game plan, and defensively they're going to be ready to go. They're going to try to get after Aaron Rodgers and try to rattle him because those quick passes and those types of things, that Dallas kind of had that scouted, and it wasn't necessarily the best way to go. So if Atlanta's able to get any kind of pass rush, I think Green Bay's going to struggle to try to get the ball out quick and also pick up yards because it just doesn't seem like the screen has been working. So we shall see. It's a fast service. It's indoors on turf, so I like that much better than if they were playing outdoors. I mean, But I don't want to take anything away from Atlanta and Matt Ryan and what he's done. And the biggest issue I see on offense for the Falcons is Matt Ryan's not missing throws. Okay, you saw Eli Manning miss Odell Beckham Jr. He overthrew some of his receivers. Some of those guys dropped the football. You saw Dak Prescott overthrow some of his receivers. You saw, Russell Wilson overthrow some of his receivers. I mean, these good quarterbacks that the Packers have dispatched on their way to this NFC Championship game, fortunately have had some tough games. They've made some bad throws. Matt Ryan does not do that. Matt Ryan doesn't miss those throws. So I just have a feeling that, like Justis was saying, the Packers are going to have to play a darn near perfect game. Their coverage has to be tight. The communication has to be tight. Julio Jones isn't going to drop the football. And you've got this two-headed monster running back in Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, and that's kind of the matchup that I look at, and I say, okay, how are you going to cover that? Because the Packers have some good linebackers, and they've got good defenders, but that's speed. Tevin Coleman wasn't in the first game, so this is their first live look at a guy like that, and I think he's the more dynamic running back that's going to give the Packers fits. That's what I'm looking at, is how are they going to stop both of those guys either in the actual ground game itself or, you get that swing pass to the outside. I mean, Zeke Elliott is a completely different talent, so he's able to get to the outside and just turn it on and just beat everybody to the edge and pick up another 5 or 6 yards on his way out the sideline. But you get a swing pass in it and no one's out there because the scheme or the defense has all the defensive backs playing deep and playing off. Could be a long day, and that's my biggest concern.
Speaking of concerns for the Falcons, we kind of mentioned it briefly in Justis's interview as we were talking about, the Falcons. Football Outsiders uses a formula. It's called DVOA, and I got to give credit to Ross Uglum because he gives me this information every week. I obviously can look it up myself, but Ross always has it on hand, so I ask him. The Falcons are ranked 30th against the run in DVOA. So that, according to Football Outsiders formula, is obviously third worst in the NFL. And Justis was talking about some stuff they can do scheme-wise to try and combat that, but reality is they were doing that stuff scheme-wise anyways, and they couldn't stop the run at all. And, the Falcons, they have some – Deion Jones is a player. He is a front runner or was a candidate for Defensive Rookie of the Year, ultimately lost out to Joey Bosa of the San Diego Chargers. But he's a small guy. A guy like T.J. Lang or Lane Taylor, if they can get to him in the second level, could kind of maul him a little bit. Those guys I mentioned, those pass rushers they have, Dwight Freeney, Brooks Reed, Vic Beasley, those guys are small guys too. Beasley's a decent run defender, but he's not a very good one. I would call him an average run defender. Brooks Reed's not a very good run defender, and Dwight Freeney is a situational pass rusher, so that kind of tells you everything you need to know there. Ty Montgomery has become a huge key to this game, and I was thinking about this earlier. It's almost like this is the week where you're almost thinking that the Packers miss Eddie Lacy because, you're thinking now this is where the running game comes in very handy because the Falcons can't defend the run, and the Packers, Ty Montgomery's never carried the ball more than 16 times a game. He's done a very good job, all things considered. I think that he will be a running back for his career. That is his career path now. But the reality is, I think the Packers are going to look for a boost from their running game in this game. And, yeah, ultimately it's still, in my opinion, going to come down to the arm of Aaron Rodgers. But I still think that they can get some gash runs from Montgomery and maybe Christine Michael as well. Jason, what do you think about the prospects of maybe a guy like Ty Montgomery having a big game? Is because, really the only real knock on him at this point is we were talking about him in pass protection. And, yeah, that's a concern. But, maybe the way to make sure he has a big impact on this game is to just hand him the ball and let him carry it, 15 times and make sure he has an impact that way.
It would be ideal. It'd be absolutely ideal, I think, because in stealing possessions, maybe the way the Packers do it isn't in stopping the Falcons and trying to force punts or turnovers. Maybe it's keeping them on the sideline by keeping drives alive. I think Ty Montgomery can be a thing in this game. I use that term, a thing, on Twitter, on Game Day, and Christine Michael. These guys, I'm telling you, this team knows what is in front of them. They've got a lot of young players, and youth has been kind of the Achilles heel When you look at how seasons have ended the past couple of years, it's been some rookie mistakes that have really stuck out. But I just have a different feeling about this year's team. These guys know what is in front of them. So Ty Montgomery in his second year, he gets it. He's ready to roll, And what I see, too, from these guys is that the moment is not too big for them. So, I could see Ty Montgomery, doing what, and we've referred to this play a bazillion times, but you had a rookie, Davante Adams, who caught an amazing throw from Aaron Rodgers against the Cowboys after 2014 in the playoffs and acted like he was in a scrimmage game and like it didn't even matter and there was no pressure on him at all. And he just juked and shook the Dallas Cowboys safeties out of their shoes and waltzed into the end zone for a touchdown. I could see Ty Montgomery doing something like that in this game where he just refuses to go down. I talked about the run against the Bears. Refuses to go down, tears it up and runs down the sideline, has a huge game. Christine Michael, he's been a nice change of pace guy, and yeah, he runs like a battering ram and like his life is on the line every time he runs through somebody, but they're going to be key. They've got to get that whole thing going on, and it doesn't necessarily have to be up the middle or into the teeth of the defense, which doesn't always seem to work too well. I think you've got that swing pass, get them out on the perimeter, just kind of test it out. The one thing I can't see and the one thing I don't want to see that I saw when I watched the game back against the Cowboys was Ty Montgomery acting like he's Le'Veon Bell and taking a few steps sideways and just kind of stopping and looking for a hole and trying to be patient and just waiting for things to develop. And all of a sudden he's running east and west and he gets pushed out of bounds or he gets tackled for a 2-yard loss. Those are the kind of things I don't want to see. I think the Falcons are going to pursue well, even though, again, not a great defensive unit. But, when I look at kind of, my utopia of how this game is going to play out, especially if some of these receivers are down, it would be great for me to write a post-game, game balls and lame calls column about the Packers moving on, and the reason being because the running game just all of a sudden became transcendent. And 88 is going to be a huge part of that, Jake. I think you make a really good point. On the flip side, these teams know what their weakness is. They know what they don't do well. So these defensive coordinators and these offensive coordinators, they're going to be scheming to make sure that they account for those weaknesses. This is a do-or-die chance to go to the Super Bowl. This is the last game in the Georgia Dome. There's a lot of pride going on the Atlanta side. So I just expect whatever weakness Atlanta has that everybody thinks the Packers are going to be able to exploit, I'm not so sure. Just, cross your fingers that they do, because both teams, I think, are going to come with a solid game plan. And what I think it's going to turn out to be is what everybody keeps talking about is a shootout where you've got a possible point total that could be touching some record books.
Very well could. And, you're talking about pride and all these different things as far as, the running game and weaknesses go. I used to have a football coach tell me you can scheme it to death. Ultimately, it comes down to execution. And that's where I get my confidence in this week, because I just trust the Packers, specifically in the offensive side of the ball, to execute things, because we talked a ton about the scheme and stuff like that before this whole run the table thing started. And really, I harped on the scheme a little bit, but at the same time, the scheme wasn't a failure when the Packers were leading the league in scoring. It was the same damn scheme. They just weren't executing. Aaron Rodgers said the same sort of things. And I just have a belief that they're going to execute. Maybe I'm wrong, and I don't want to spoil too much for later on in the game, or later on in this show. But Ty Montgomery, I think he could play a huge role this week. I mentioned that. Christine Michael is another one. We've talked about. Aaron Ripkowski, I know my guy Chris at Titletown Sound Off loves him. I don't know if that's a joke or if he legitimately loves him, but I don't see the purpose. Yeah, he can get a few yards, and I feel like you're donating it down when you give him the ball. That's how I feel. But real quick before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, this is a week where the receiving core is banged up. And I talked about this earlier, Jason. Here's my theory. I alluded to it a little bit. The question I have is, what do you make of this situation? The money quote that everybody's pointing to from Mike McCarthy's press conference today was, if this were a regular season game, Jordy and Davante and Geronimo Allison probably would not play. And everyone's like, oh, my God, how healthy are those guys? And, how effective are they going to be if they wouldn't even play in a regular season game? My thought on that is I don't buy a damn word that Mike McCarthy says this week publicly. And, if I'm wrong, if Mike McCarthy's being honest, then, he's being honest, and that's great. But something else that I know about the NFL is like, for example, the injury report, Richard Sherman is being talked about how he played through an MCL injury throughout the year. He wasn't even listed on it. The Seahawks are in trouble for that now. Or, Tom Brady for years was listed as probable with a right shoulder injury. Shoulder doesn't hurt. There was never any concern as to whether he was going to play. He's listed on there as gamesmanship. That's what I tend to think this is. The Falcons, if you look at it, outside of Randall Cobb, obviously Cobb is listed in the Packers' top 3 receivers, but Geronimo Allison, Davante Adams, and Jordy Nelson, that's 3 of the Packers' top 4 receivers. I'm not saying those injuries are fake. I think that obviously we saw Adams get hurt. Obviously we saw Nelson's ribs get broken, and we didn't see anything about Geronimo Allison. But I don't think McCarthy's going to tell us anything that we don't need to know. And I think that with it being the championship game this week, the less that Dan Quinn and Kyle Shanahan and all these guys in Atlanta know, I think is the better. So I think that I would take anything you hear this week in those press conferences with a grain of salt. You'll find out tomorrow. I would bet any single player that has been listed on the injury report is going to be listed as questionable. And my thought on it is I'm not really going to worry too much until about 12 o'clock or 12:30 or whenever it is that'll be. That's when they'll talk about the inactives. And that's when I'll worry about who's going to be inactive and who's not. But I just don't buy much into the thought of if this was a regular season game, these guys wouldn't play. I don't buy much into that quote specifically. I think that's gamesmanship more than anything. Jason, what's your thought on that quote specifically?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and I think I kind of glossed over it. It's like I said, if these guys can be out there at all, they're going to be out there. This is the NFC Championship game. Jordy Nelson has no business playing a football game right now. I don't know how badly cracked his ribs are, but cracked ribs, he's practicing. There's no way if this was a regular season game that Jordy Nelson would even be close to playing. This would be like a 4 to 5 week injury, and we wouldn't see him for quite some time. He's out there practicing because it's the NFC Championship game. Jordy Nelson has been to a Super Bowl before, and he sure as hell would love to go to another one because he wants to be part of a Packers team that won 2 Super Bowls on his watch because the previous regime, with names that we all know that don't need to be mentioned on this show, didn't. They only won 1. Went to a second, didn't win it. So these guys understand what's in front of them. The gamesmanship is just it's absolutely amazing. And like I said, I expect to be pleasantly surprised when I turn the TV on Sunday and see who's out there in uniform and ready to go. This Packers team wants to win. This Packers team is ready to try. Doesn't mean that they're going to do it. It doesn't mean that it's absolutely going to happen. It's going to be an extremely tough battle uphill. This is not the same Atlanta Falcons team that they faced years ago, so don't expect the same crazy output of amazing catches in defense, although maybe that could happen, that we saw back then because, these are 2 completely different teams. But same 2 quarterbacks, and it's going to be a great matchup. But, the media thing, and Jacob, you kind of had to talk me off the ledge a little bit earlier today because it was like, oh, man, these guys are on the injury report. But the point that you made, Jacob, that really should calm everybody else down is look what's happening to Seattle. Seattle's potentially going to lose a second-round draft pick because they were dishonest about an injury to one of their players. The Green Bay Packers tend to kind of do things the right way. I'm not saying they're perfect, and I know everyone talks about how Packer people is a myth, and every team cheats, and every team tries to do things to deceive others, and, we don't know the players as people and all this kind of stuff that's going on, and I'm not here to, talk about how holy these guys are or are not. But the Packers are probably just being smart here and saying, hey, listen, we're not about to give up a draft pick at this point right now. I mean, we want to win this year. We got draft picks next year. Minnesota Vikings don't. We want to retool, and we want to kick some ass. So I think that's what we're looking at in terms of that particular comment.
Real quick before we move to the defense, just in a nutshell, Jason, how do you feel about the offense on Sunday? And my answer is, listen, even if I hear Jordy Nelson's inactive and Davante Adams is inactive and Geronimo Allison's inactive, and Jason, I'm like you. I don't anticipate hearing those things. The reality is the Packers have number 12. Therefore, I think they're fine. And maybe not fine from the standpoint of, with those three guys inactive, they probably can't score 40. But they still have Rodgers. And with Rodgers on the field, they have a chance. They got guys like Randall Cobb and Jared Cook. And Ty Montgomery is out there. We've seen Aaron Rodgers make plays with Jeff Janis out there. And Jared Abbrederis was a playmaker for him last year in the playoffs. And James Jones, who didn't play a single snap in the NFL this season, in the regular season. And he was Packers' leading receiver last year. That is what Aaron Rodgers can do. So my thought is, as long as number 12 is healthy, the Packers have a chance to score points. If the Packers win this game, or lose this game, I should say, I don't think it'll be because of the offense. Now, let me preface that again by saying I don't anticipate that all three of those receivers will be inactive once Sunday hits. But I think the Packers will be just fine on offense because they have number 12. So, Jason, how do you feel about the offense once Sunday afternoon hits?
My thoughts on the offense are exactly what you just said. There's not really a whole lot to add. It's 12. It's Aaron Rodgers. He can make anything happen with anybody who's out there. I've joked about how you and I could probably turn into stud receivers in that offense just because of how amazing of a quarterback that he is. I mean, did you know, I didn't know until after the fact, did you know that he kind of drew up that last play to Jared Cook and that wasn't an actual play call?
Yeah, I told the story on Sunday's show, so that kind of shows how much you listen when I'm talking.
Yeah, so I may have forgotten. And for those of you who don't know, because I mentioned this probably for the last 3 shows in a row, I've been dealing with a massive case of back issue, and actually I had to go and get some injections today, which finally have loosened things up to the point where I can function like a little bit more of a human being. So I do apologize, Jacob. I know that, and I even listened back to the show, so that does tell you how good the medications that I'm on are, because I'm in and out of consciousness, obviously, but I'm here now and I'm ready to roll. That's the key. Aaron Rodgers is the key. It doesn't matter who's out there. Like I said, in that first matchup, he had touchdown passes to Trevor Davis. That was a nice pass to Trevor Davis. It was a nice catch to Trevor Davis, and that's a kid who had not caught a touchdown all season. He hasn't been out there much, but he was able to make a play in a game. You got Jeff Janis, who out of nowhere somehow in big games just seems to show up and do big things. So, yes, please. Although I'm kind of thinking in this game it would be more, I'm kind of hoping it's more maybe on the kick return side, and it would be nice to see him break one and just bust one into the end zone, on special teams, because that's one way to steal a possession and really kind of suck the life out of that building and out of the Falcons, is to get a big score on special teams and not even have to, worry about relying on your offense or your defense. But like you said, as long as 12 is out there, it's on. It's game on, and anything is possible with that offense. I have no worries about that. Justis made a great point. It's going to be all about that defense and all about the back end and how well they can keep those receivers. They'll probably give up those yards, but can they keep them out of the end zone? That was the key against Dallas, and they managed it. Can they do it again?
Can they do it again? Indeed, and I would argue with your back excuses, your back is not your ears, but nonetheless, I forgive you, because that is the point of why this partnership and this show works. But either way, that's a top 5 show moment maybe in the history of the 2 years of this show. Let's move to the defensive side of things. We are waiting on Erin Thompson of Bleacher Report. She will be our next guest to talk about the NFC Championship game. We've gotten through the offense in the first hour of the show. We talked with Justis Mosqueda. Playmaker mentality, Bleacher Report, NFL 1000. He does all kinds of stuff. Heading down to the Senior Bowl. That was a fun segment. We talked about the offensive side of things, but Jason just mentioned the big key here is we want to talk about the defense. I believe that the key to the Falcons, regardless of what anyone tries to tell you, that offense starts and revolves around number 11. And for those of you that live under a rock, that's Julio Jones. He had a bit of a turf toe issue, and as I say that, we have finally added some grace and some beauty to this show. I can guarantee, Erin, I don't want to show favoritism from our other guests, but you are now tied as the prettiest person that has joined this show with Michelle Bruton. So everyone.
Well, I appreciate that.
Actually, I tied with Michelle and Juliana Check, so I was wrong. So there's three of you. It's a three-way tie now.
I appreciate that.
So everyone, this is Erin Underwood. Erin, introduce yourself. That is the best I can do as far as an introduction goes. But Erin, tell us who you are, where you're from, what you do, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can top that. So first of all, thank you guys for having me on. Like you said, I do work at Bleacher Report. My official title is NFL programmer, but it's more of just like spending all day long reading through NFL news. So basically what I would be doing in my downtime anyway is my job. And then I'm originally from Wisconsin, actually. Grew up in Appleton, now live out in San Francisco. So I was born and raised a Packer fan.
Nice. Awesome. Erin, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. This is Jason, and it's good to finally chat in person. I know we've kind of talked a little bit back and forth about the Packers and this incredible run that they've been on, and we're going into hour 2 of our show. You know, normally we try to keep it to an hour, but this one is going a little bit longer because we had a couple guests, the second of which is yourself, and looking forward to some great insight, and you do great work. So for those of you out there who have not yet followed Erin on Twitter, definitely do so. Some great insights and some great conversations about the Packers. So jumping right into the game that we've kind of talked about this weekend, I kind of asked you what your initial thoughts were, so I kind of tailored some of the questions around that. So my first one is, with the changes in the improvement with the offense this season, I mean, they went through the slump. They had the losing streak. They weren't playing well. Everybody thought Aaron Rodgers had lost his touch. Mike McCarthy needed to get fired. There was huge problems with the team in general, but the offense itself wasn't playing well. Then all of a sudden the light bulb went off. You know, what is, to you, one of the biggest differences between the first meeting between the Packers and the Falcons and this game that you think is an advantage for the Packers? So in other words, like, what do you see now that the Packers are doing they weren't doing before that gives them an edge in this game?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think if you look at this team compared to the team back in Week 8, they're just completely different. I think the biggest and most important thing, obviously, is the injuries. Back in Week 8, we were missing Randall Cobb, James Starks, Ty Montgomery, Jared Cook. Eddie Lacy also wasn't playing back then. So those were some really big injuries that hurt us. Also, the run game hadn't yet developed. So with Lacy out and Starks also out, I think the last time they were really relying on Aaron Ripkowski, Niall Davis, Don Jackson to get the bulk of the carries. The last time they met, I think Aaron Rodgers was actually the leading rusher. He had something like 6 carries for 60 yards. So I don't think that the run game is necessarily going to be a big factor, but it definitely doesn't hurt. But again, I don't know if I would call what the Packers have done necessarily improvements. I think they're more developments. I was listening to what you guys were saying before, and these are really young guys. It's kind of, we have this almost like Mod Podge of receivers from week to week who managed to somehow come together and win. So I think it's more that they are just kind of comfortable with Aaron Rodgers' style of play than they were back in Week 8. I think they've had time now to find their flow and work together. So I think it's really just a matter of injuries not being as big of a factor this time. I guess we'll see what the injury report says on Saturday, but also just the time they've had now to develop is really key.
You're talking about that hodgepodge of receivers and the injury report, and those two things kind of go hand in hand this week because 4 of the Packers' 6 wide receivers are on the injury report. And I mentioned Jeff Janis is kind of on there, but he may as well not be because he was a full participant. Mm-hmm. So at least 3 of those receivers, Geronimo Allison, Davante Adams, and Jordy Nelson. I would say there's at least a moderate level of concern for all 3 of those players. and there's at least a moderate chance that all three of those guys don't suit up on Sunday, how confident are you that the heroes of this game could be a guy like Jared Cook or Richard Rodgers or Jeff Janis, or maybe a guy that was inactive? He was a healthy scratch for a while, and that was Trevor Davis at times throughout the season.
Again, like you guys were saying before, I think Rodgers he's just so good at turning really any receiver into a playmaker. You mentioned James Jones last year being the leading receiver, and he hasn't played in the regular season at all this year. So I think one of the great advantages of Green Bay's system is that they really are able to develop their receivers into key players. So, look at Geronimo Allison. He was on the practice squad midway through the season, and now he's a solid contributor each week. So I think, depending, again, on what the injury report says on Saturday, I'm hopeful for Davante Adams, obviously. But I think we're still going to see probably most of the action coming from Randall Cobb, Ty Montgomery, if he's listed as receiver or running back, I'm not sure, with a sprinkling of the other guys that you mentioned up there. But it definitely would not surprise me at all if we saw someone like Jared Cook again emerge with a huge play. Jeff Janis come through with another Hail Mary. Hail Mary would be awesome. But I think, again, they've done it from week to week with whoever happens to be on the field. So it definitely wouldn't be a shocker if one of those guys is able to make a clutch play in a key moment and really become a hero of the game.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what they're going to have to be. Remember last year in Arizona, that was the case. Jeff, Janis with the catch, and Jared Abbrederis at the time, and guys that went down. Randall Cobb was out of that game. Nelson was already out. So I think you've got a point there. And before I move on to my next question, so you grew up in Appleton, so I have to ask you, because I'm always curious, kind of what life is like out there in the Green Bay area. I know Appleton's about, a half hour away from Green Bay. Is that right?
Yeah, it's about a 25-minute drive.
25. Okay, so it's close enough. But, living out there and growing up out there, and I don't know, what years you grew up out there, because you're in the Bay Area right now, which is absolutely beautiful, and I'm extremely envious of that. But what was life like kind of growing up out there, and what is the local culture there, compared to, those of us, I go to games, and obviously everyone's hyped up and amped up, but I'm in a 1 square mile area of Lambeau Field and everything that's around it, kind of going to the bars, and everyone's hyped up, but even during the off season, what was life like kind of growing up there, and then just the Packers culture of being a local?
Yeah, it's funny because when I moved away from Appleton and when I moved away from Wisconsin, I think the one thing that really stuck with me was the Green Bay Packers, because it's almost like it becomes kind of a piece of you. The culture there is just so wrapped up in the Green Bay Packers. Everybody is wearing green and gold on Sunday, from your grandma down to your dog. Everybody's wearing Packer gear, and it becomes part of life out there. My parents, their house have a Packer room. They have a whole room dedicated to the Packers, and that's not odd, for Wisconsin. It's not odd for that area. So it definitely, leaving Appleton, I was able to really appreciate the culture there a lot more and appreciate just the love that people in Appleton and people in Wisconsin in general just have for the Packers, because you don't see that with other teams. Of course, the Steelers and the Patriots, you see it, but not many other teams really have that love and that fan base like we do in Wisconsin and Appleton. So I would say it's just, it's a way of life. Packers are a way of life in Wisconsin, and they're a way of life in Appleton. So it was a great, great place to grow up, and I try to get back there as often as possible because I really do miss it.
I got to say, I agree 100%. I lived in Green Bay for 2 years when I was going to the university there, and I always say I was meant to be born and raised in Wisconsin. I just happened to be dropped in Illinois instead, because the same sort of things you're describing, a room dedicated to the Packers, everything I own, I feel like, is green and gold, and I'm in Illinois, so everything around me is blue and orange, and it's Chicago Bears. And I'm like the misfit child around here, and it's perfect. When I go up there, and I'm up there as often as I can be as well, and it's it's a different culture, it's a different feeling. Everything about Wisconsin is, even the McDonald's is green and gold. The McDonald's on Oneida Street is green and gold. That's crazy. Or they have a Packers logo on their cups, or everything up there is dedicated to the Packers. And So is this show, and that's the cheesiest transition that you are going to possibly get on this show, but that's the best I can do. Matt Ryan we were talking about this too, is the best quarterback the Packers are going to face during this stretch. Since they've won all these games they faced, I went through some of the quarterbacks just to make sure that I really did think this, but I do. Brock Osweiler, Carson Wentz, Cam Bradford, Matt Stafford, Russell Wilson, Eli Manning, Dak Prescott. None of those names, the only name that really kind of gets me going like, that's kind of scary is Russell Wilson. And the Seahawks offense was so bad this year that even that wasn't that scary. Matt Ryan is the best quarterback the Packers are going to face in this stretch. How do you see the Packers, combining that with the Packers' porous defense, the way that it's played especially the last week specifically after they got up 21-3. How do you see them being able to keep this Falcons offense in check, especially an offense that really has all their guns? Because the last time that the Falcons played the Packers, they didn't have Tevin Coleman, and Julio Jones was playing. Julio Jones will still be playing hobbled this week, but he was significantly more hobbled the last time around. This time he should be much healthier.
Like you said, Matt Ryan is definitely the best quarterback that they've faced this year. I think Dak Prescott was probably the other one. And then again, obviously Russell Wilson just because he's so mobile. But I don't think that they're going to be able to stop Matt Ryan, in all honesty. They're not going to have some magic formula where they're going to be able to come in and stop Matt Ryan from making big plays. I think this conversation of how we stop these explosive offenses or how we stop any offense really, especially in the case of Dallas, has kind of been a hot topic throughout the season, especially the postseason. But we're sitting here now, only a couple days away from the NFC title game. So I think a big reason that we have been able to win the last few weeks, it's not because of our defense. It's because Manning struggled to connect with guys like OBJ and some of his other receivers. Dak struggled to find his stride early. And I think you guys mentioned earlier that, the Packers had 4 or 5 opportunities late in that game to come away with an interception, and they didn't. So I think, the Cowboys also had scoring drives on their last 5 of their 6 possessions. So it wasn't much that the Packers were doing to really stop them from scoring. It just was kind of that their offenses couldn't keep pace with our offense, or rather, Dak Prescott couldn't keep pace with Aaron Rodgers. So I think going through the injuries, obviously having Quentin Rollins around this time, Demarius Randall around this time is going to be a big help. So I don't know if Morgan Burnett, I'm not sure if he was practicing today. I didn't see, but that'll be a big loss for us. I think the last time the Packers played, too, they had Ladarius Gunter covering Julio Jones, which is kind of interesting. He had one of his worst games of the season, I think the worst game of the season. So, like you said, Julio will be playing again hobbled this week, but I don't think that they're really going to stop him, in all honesty. It's going to come down really to who has the better arm, Matt Ryan or Aaron Rodgers.
That or who's got the ball last, and that's what a lot of people have said.
Exactly.
Julio Jones. Yeah, Julio Jones has a little case of turf toe. You never know. We were talking about gamesmanship and how some of these things are maybe meant to kind of deceive a little bit, and how banged up are some of these Packers receivers, because Davante Adams came back into the game. So typically you don't see a guy come back into a game and then get held out the following week, especially in a game of that magnitude. And then you've got Geronimo Allison, who's become important. I mean, and I think Julio Jones is still going to be able to get his. So, you make a good point. The defense is going to have to do their job. Gunter almost made a big play at the end of that game and had a chance for an interception, which would, when you look back at the play, he didn't really drop it. I think the receiver got a hand on it. It would have been a really tough play to make. But if he makes that play, I think the Packers win that game. I think this game is at Lambeau this week. So, that could have been kind of a flip in that sense. But you make some really good points there. So, I mean, out of everything that just to put everybody's mind at ease, Erin, you asked about Morgan Burnett. He did not practice today, but, ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Janis has been upgraded to full participation as of today. So everybody bow in front of the Janis. He is healthy. Okay, so we've talked about a ton of things. We talked about Matt Ryan, the defense. We've broken down a lot of the factors of this game, some of the obvious things and things that we think are going to happen. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here with this question, although I did send it to you in advance, so at least I know you've had a little time to think about it. So of everything that the Packers need to do to try to come out victorious in this game. There has to be an X factor. So fill in the blank. If the Packers do blank, they are likely on to Houston.
I think it's the same thing they've been doing the last couple of weeks, just allowing Rodgers to be mobile. So we know that he is really one of the best when it comes to extending plays and just making those unbelievably impossible throws that you just don't see other quarterbacks making. So as long as the O-line can continue to protect Rodgers and give him the opportunities to really make those game-changing passes that he does. I mean, he fits it into places that you can't even imagine. You don't even see the receiver open, and somehow he manages to make it in there. So I think just really giving Rodgers those opportunities is going to be the difference maker, because he really is the only difference maker in this game. These two teams are very evenly matched. So it's, like you said, it's going to come down to whoever has the ball last. But then I would also say along those lines and along the lines of protecting Rodgers also comes down to just not turning the ball over. So they, in the last 6 games when they were on their winning streak at the end there, they weren't turning the ball over at all. I think they were like 15-1 in their turnover ratio. So just maintaining control of the ball, giving Rodgers the time that he needs to really just let the play develop and stay comfortable inside the pocket is going to be key. Not forcing him to make any mistakes. Okay,
so Packers, Falcons, Sunday afternoon. I think it's at 2 o'clock. Who's moving on to Houston?
I mean, I heard that the way you guys dismantled Justis before it came on, so I'm terrified to say Atlanta. But I would definitely say that I do think it is the Packers are going to win this one. With Aaron Rodgers being on just the hot streak that he is right now, it's kind of almost becoming old news that he's just completely dominant in every aspect of the game. I think when you put the two quarterbacks side by side, Matt Ryan has had a phenomenal year, and he's probably going to be the MVP. I do think that Aaron Rodgers just has a little bit more to bring to the table as far as mobility, a little bit more when it comes to making plays. Matt Ryan is consistent, but I think Aaron Rodgers is the better of the two quarterbacks, and that's definitely what's going to pull it out in this one.
And that's what they usually say, is the quarterback is the key. Who's got the better quarterback, and that's where a lot of people kind of make their picks in some of these bigger games. So who do you have winning on the AFC side?
Definitely the Patriots. I think, Tom Brady's got that one.
All right, so you got Packers.
Well, I'm never going to argue with anybody named Erin.
Yeah.
What's that?
I'm never arguing with anyone named Erin. So whether that's Rodgers or Underwood
it's a good name to have. My fantasy name actually this year was Aaron Rodgers, spelled E-R-I-N, Rodgers. So it's definitely a convenient name.
Oh, around here in Illinois, that's the name that Bears fans use for the quarterback when they're trying to be, derogatory towards the quarterback. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that.
Oh yeah, that's kind of disappointing.
Nonetheless, so Erin has Packers and Patriots, which is the dream matchup for every media member that wants a lazy Rodgers versus Brady narrative to use, and that will be the tiebreaker, be-all, end-all for who is the better quarterback. We all know it's Aaron Rodgers. But, Erin, that's what you have is Packers and Patriots. Do you think the Patriots and Steelers game is close?
I think it'll be relatively close. Ben Roethlisberger's, he's been, like you guys mentioned before, those two quarterbacks have been to the playoffs so many times. They've been to the AFC Championship game so many times. I think it'll be close. If you think about last week, though, I think they had like six field goals in that game, which was a record for the playoffs. I don't know. I think they have a better defense, but I can see the Patriots winning by maybe 7 or 10. So, moderately close, I guess.
Yeah, they better figure out a way to score a couple touchdowns. Erin, thanks for coming on. You're welcome back anytime. Hopefully we can talk draft or review or anything of that sort. Hopefully we're talking about a team that's picking 32nd if we're talking about the draft. Enjoy the game this weekend.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we will not lambaste you because you did pick the Packers, so you chose wisely for this show specifically.
I did. Yes. Well, thank you guys so much. It's been fun.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you, Erin. It was Erin Underwood of Bleacher Report. I want to thank her for coming on. She talked about a wide variety of stuff. Jason, the one thing we talked about was, the best quarterback that the Packers are going to face in this stretch. Again, I wanted to go over quarterbacks that the Packers have faced since Aaron Rodgers said that they were going to run the table, and they are in order: Carson Wentz, Brock Osweiler, Russell Wilson, Matt Barkley, Sam Bradford, Matthew Stafford, Eli Manning in an icebox, Dak Prescott. There's not a quarterback on that list that really gets me going, oh, that quarterback can single-handedly beat you. Matt Ryan is the first quarterback on that list that I think can. And that's where we get to our next talking point, and that's where, this is the guy who, he's not going to miss those throws. The guy, Matthew Stafford missed touchdowns in that first, that last game against Detroit. Eli Manning, same thing. Dak Prescott, if the Packers DBs could catch the damn ball, you're talking about a guy that threw 3 or 4 interceptions and a really different result. I mean, the flair for the dramatic type, and as far as someone who really enjoys reliving games like that, the way that the game ended, yeah, I enjoyed that. But I really would have enjoyed a 45-13 shellacking of the Cowboys, which is what it would have been if the Packers would have caught the ball. They didn't, 34-31. Matt Ryan is not going to miss those throws. And the difference in the game the last time the Packers played the Falcons was that Matt Ryan threw a ball into Ladarius Gunter's chest and he dropped it. And that's the kind of game that I think you're looking at again this week is if the ball hits, whether it's Gunter or Demarius Randall or Joe Thomas or HaHa Clinton Dix or whomever, I mean, you can look at even the Seattle game, you look at all the mistakes that the Packers made down the stretch. And the reality is if HaHa Clinton Dix knocks down a 2-point conversion that should have been an easy play, Mason Crosby's field goal at the end of that game that tied it wins the game, and the Packers are playing against the Patriots in that Super Bowl. Didn't do it. That's why the Packers went home after going to overtime. But, Jason, you've been talking about this all show. Ladarius Gunter, you think he's due for a big play, and he nearly had one in Atlanta. And the other thing I want to harp on, had Ladarius Gunter made that play in Atlanta, this game, assuming everything shook out the same way, likely is in Green Bay. So explain to me very quickly, why do you think, is it just a hunch, or do you just have a reason for why you think Ladarius Gunter is due for a big play? Because this is a guy who, I wrote a story that came out, I believe, yesterday about Ladarius Gunter, and he's really faced the gauntlet of wide receivers. Maybe not quite the gauntlet, but, I mean, he's gone through Odell Beckham Jr. in the wild card round against the Giants. He shadowed him. Shadowed Dez Bryant in the divisional round. That didn't go so well. Did well against Odell Beckham, and now he's got Julio Jones, who, for my money's worth, is the best receiver in football. I don't envy Ladarius Gunter from that standpoint of those are 3 tough assignments back-to-back-to-back. So what's your reason for the hunch, Mr. Upbeat Lollipop?
I don't know, because I keep having this hunch every week, and it doesn't happen. Now I'm starting to just think that I'm just riding it because I keep thinking, like, well, I better keep saying it, and then eventually when it happens, I'll be right. But I don't want to be that fan who keeps saying, like, oh, the Packers are going to blow it. Packers are going to blow it, and then when they lose in the playoffs, it's like, well, I told you 13 weeks ago the Packers were going to blow it because every week I said the same thing. But Gunter he's got it in him. He's got that fire in him. When I was at the Seattle game, I got there very early, and I was over by the tunnel watching players come out for warm-ups. And one thing that I look for in pregame is kind of demeanor and how these guys are warming up and how they're loose, how they're practicing, how they are. And it's funny because Seattle was out there, kind of joking around, acting like frat boys, but they were loose, they were laughing, they were practicing hard, they were really getting after it and doing their drills, practicing, and I thought to myself, man, Seattle looks locked in and ready to go. And then, the Packers would come out, like Nelson jogged out of the tunnel and kind of went and did his warm-ups, and, everybody's just kind of off doing their own thing, and they were very quiet and reserved, and I'm like, man, are the Packers going to come out flat in this game? We all saw what happened there. But I specifically remember Ladarius Gunter, when he came back into the tunnel, go back in the locker room to put his uniform on, he had his headphones on. He was bobbing his head. He was locked in. And I thought to myself, like, that is one young man who understands what it takes to be successful in this game. He makes mistakes. He's been put in some tough positions. He's given up some big plays. He's not Sam Shields. He's not that type of player. He doesn't have gaudy stats. but he's a smart player, and I just keep feeling like it's a hunch. You asked if it was a hunch. That's all it is, Jacob. It's just a hunch that he's got a big play in him, and so is it going to be this week in the biggest game of his life at a time when, frankly, if it's an interception, I don't care if it happens on the first play of the game or the last play of the game. It's at the perfect time. It's at a huge time because every possession is valuable, and the Packers need to make every play that they possibly can. But Gunter's just that guy. He's gotten the job done, obviously, with some help. And give a lot of credit to HaHa Clinton-Dix and Morgan Burnett for playing back there and kind of backing him up and playing over the top and the communication that they have between the two of each other. But Ladarius Gunter was not a guy that was supposed to be playing starting on the outside this entire season, and he has, since week 2, has been the man on the outside. And he's drawn, like you said, Jacob, a ton of wide receivers who are going to be in, if not the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I know that's not many, their own team's Hall of Fame eventually. So these are not slouch wide receivers that he's covering. And Julio Jones, pound for pound, physically right now, I think is the best wide receiver in the game. So it's going to be a huge matchup. But I just feel like he's got one in him. He didn't make it last time. I love my storylines. I love the, wouldn't it be sweet if, wouldn't it be cool if he didn't get it done last time, and all of a sudden this time, maybe Gunter is the Tramon Williams of this game in Atlanta in the playoffs. I don't know, just a hunch.
I will say, the Tramon Williams moment you're referring to, that is the loudest I think that I have ever screamed in my house during a football game. I'm not going to say that's the most excited I've ever been because obviously that was Super Bowl 45, but the pick six right before halftime, that was really loud. So if that's going to be Ladarius Gunter, I am all for it, if that's what's going to happen. So we'll see if that's the case. I tend to think if there's going to be a guy in the secondary who's going to make a big play, it's going to be Demarius Randall. That's not because I think Demarius Randall's had a great season, because he certainly has not. But if there's a guy who makes a big play, it has been Randall. We'll see. We'll see what happens as far as that goes when it comes to Ladarius Gunter. And Julio Jones, I would expect him to shadow him because he did do a good job the last time around, whether that was because Jones was really hobbled or because Gunter just matches up with him well for whatever reason, remains to be seen. One thing that cannot be argued is that the Packers need a big game out of their front seven, whether that's against the run or rushing the passer. This is the game where Clay Matthews and Julius Peppers and Nick Perry and Dayton Jones and Jaron Elliott, who's hopefully going to be back this week, those guys got to turn up the heat on Matt Ryan. And I know Justis said this game's more about the back seven than it is the front. That is probably true, but, you're talking about sacks and interceptions and stuff like that. In order to get sacks, the Packers are paying a lot of money to Clay Matthews and Julius Peppers. And they brought back Nick Perry, and they wanted Dayton Jones to be a pass rusher. This is their week. The Falcons have a good offensive line, but the Packers, these guys are supposed to be really good pass rushers. And I'm looking at you specifically, Clay Matthews, because you have made pretty much one play since the playoffs started. You were largely invisible in the Dallas game. I know that you were getting held a little bit by Tyron Smith, but I don't care. You're paid to be a big-time player. It's time to show up. And that's just how it is. And Jason, I don't know if there's much. I don't think there's much to add there. Those guys, they've got to come to play. As far as special teams goes, you talked about this Jeff Janis maybe breaking a kickoff return. Eric Weems did that in the 2010 playoff game before the Packers blew them off the field. Both teams have excellent kickers. We obviously saw Mason Crosby make a couple of bombs in the last game to win. Matt Bryant is very good as well. So the hope is, if it comes down to kicking a game-winning field goal, we got to hope that it's our guy kicking it instead of theirs, because I don't think Matt Bryant's going to miss that kick any more than I think Mason Crosby's going to miss that kick. But Jason, before we get to predictions, I want to know, this is a really nerve-wracking week, and I know that it is for you as well as it is me, because we've been talking all week. So I want to know, today's Thursday, so tomorrow's Friday and Saturday. It's the last 2 days before the game. What are your plans to kind of help calm your nerves and get through the day?
Man, I don't know. A lot of rum and Coke, I guess. For those of you who don't know, I guess, spoiler alert, that's my go-to drink. Jacob, you will argue with that and be shocked that I said that, because that is not my drink of choice when we were able to hang out in Green Bay a couple of years ago. But that was a different circumstance and that was a different situation. So we'll leave shots out of it. And I know how you feel about the Irish car bombs. I probably just made you sick to your stomach mentioning it right now. So, nonetheless, let's just forget about that.
I just puked on air for the first time.
I know. I know. It's well documented how you feel. It's well documented how you feel about it, and every chance you get, you remind me what a punk I am. So, I don't know. I will say this. Those of you who we weren't doing the show back when the Seattle and Green Bay game took place. We hadn't started doing our show yet. That game I didn't feel good about from the beginning. I didn't like the matchup. It was in Seattle. That was a different Seattle Seahawks team. Jacob, I was the most negative Nancy, upbeat lollipop, insert, terrible attitude that there could possibly be. And for that game, I literally sat on the couch in the same position, expressionless, for the entire afternoon until the onside kick debacle, and then I got up and left the room because I just knew something bad was going to happen. So this time around, I'm nowhere near close to feeling that way. I think the Packers have just as good a chance to win this game as any. I think it's a toss-up. Calming the nerves, I have no idea. I think, honestly, I'm going to probably try to do as much non-football related stuff as I can up until game time. And then I'm just going to really try to watch the game and enjoy it and relish the fact that I have this stress, that I have this game to watch, because many of my neighbors here in the great state of Minnesota, in the greater Minneapolis, Twin Cities area, have nothing. They're out shoveling their driveways. They're out snow plowing their paths to get out of their garage. And they've got nothing better to do. Or they're glued to the television, because let me tell you, these people like whichever team is playing the Packers almost more than they like the Vikings. So I'll relish in the fact that that is their Sunday afternoon, and that is the pathetic existence that they've been reduced to. But I'm one of those that has to kind of get away from it, and with this back situation I've been dealing with, I've had to stay home from work a little bit this week and been, in and out, and I've watched so much coverage about this game, and I've listened to so many people talk about this game that I am just absolutely overloaded. So I'm just going to kind of step away from it and then turn the TV on and just watch the game and get into it. But I've got a belief. I've got a belief. So I'm not going to sit there expressionless this time. They get up 19-0 like they did against Seattle. I'm going to be waving the flag. I'm going to be jumping around. I'm going to be doing all sorts of crazy stuff, because this team is different. I just feel different about it. So I'm ready to be amped up. I also am going to put out a little bit of a poll. I'm not going to do an official poll on Twitter, but I'm going to ask those of you listening and those of you who will oblige me with a response to tell me whether or not you want me to tweet during this game, because I did not tweet during the Seattle Packers NFC Championship game. I told everybody leading up to that game I wasn't going to tweet. Ross Uglum wrote back and said, I'll believe it when I see it. I sent not a single tweet during the game, but as soon as the game was over, I was all over Twitter. So I'm going to be putting out that same poll. Yay or nay, do you want me tweeting during the game? And I'm going to let the majority make the decision on this one.
Interesting. I've said, last year, Jason, we did the show last year, so you kind of know how I felt going into the playoffs. I didn't want the season to be over, but I did, because I really felt that the Packers just had no chance to do anything special. 2014 was different. I love that team. That team has a very special connection to me. That was the year I was at all 9 home games. They beat the Dallas Cowboys at home in the playoffs. I had a quiet confidence. I couldn't sleep the night before they went to play the Cowboys. And I had a quiet confidence going into Seattle because I remember after that Seahawks game, or excuse me, not after the Seahawks game, after the Cowboys game, you know, the camera guys and some of the guys I was working with and some of my friends that I worked with that day are standing around and, you know, they're like, well, they're happy now and, you know, but reality is going to set in, and reality is they can't beat Seattle in Seattle. And I just had this feeling set over me, and I was like, no, you know what? We're going to win. And I had that confidence all week, and it wasn't a feeling, you know, last week I mentioned, you know, there's feelings with your head and there's feelings with your heart, and this wasn't a feeling with my heart. I had a feeling with my head that the Packers were going to win that game. And I didn't know what it was. I just felt they were a better team. And I had that confidence. So it was throughout the week, I wasn't really that nervous until, Jason, like you mentioned, once the onside kick happened, that's when the nerves hit in, and I was like, I just don't know if they could overcome that. Obviously, they didn't. And my friends that watched the game with me that day can vouch. They said they've never seen me look more upset, sad, broken, whatever you want to call it. Now, the reality is that's a good thing. If the saddest I've ever been is just because my favorite football team lost an NFC championship game, that is a blessing, because in the grand scheme of things, that's not so bad. But that's also true. That is the saddest I've ever been, is when the Packers lost to the Seahawks that day. Now, this year, I can't remember the last 2 weeks being more nervous for a set of football games than I have for this Cowboys game last week and the Falcons game this week, because I don't remember exactly when the feeling changed, because, again, we did this show after they got embarrassed by the Redskins, and we were talking about guys getting fired and, you know, talking about potential draft shows and what the new normal was and all that other stuff. I don't know when the feeling changed and when the belief was that this team was special, but I truly believe this team is special. I believe that, I don't know if there's such a thing as a team of destiny, but if there is, that's what I think this team is. Because the reason I don't know if that's a thing is because I thought that's what the 2003 Packers were, the year that Brett Favre's dad died, and they got in the playoffs on Nathan Poole's catch in the corner of the end zone that knocked the Vikings out of the playoffs. And then the next week, they pick 6 into Philadelphia, and then, of course, Favre throws the game away in overtime after a 4th and 26. That's why I struggle to believe in teams of destiny. But if there is such a thing, I keep telling, like, everybody that's willing to listen, like, that's why I almost refuse to worry about the injury report, because I keep telling her it's a magic carpet ride, and the Packers are going to win a bunch of games in a row, and it'll end up being, 10 in a row if they win them all? 10 in a row and win the Super Bowl. And I can't remember being more nervous for that, because I truly believe and I truly want that to happen for this group. And there's genuine sentiment for the veterans. It's why I wanted it in 2010 for guys like Donald Driver and Charles Woodson. And this year it's guys like, Julius Peppers. TJ Lang might be playing his last year in Green Bay. And you got some young guys who haven't tasted that success yet, like HaHa Clinton Dix and Mike Daniels, players like that. You got a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who, in my opinion, has faced all kinds of crap since his career started. And I think he's on a run that, if the Packers win these next 2 games, I think he cements himself in the top 5 of greatest quarterbacks of all time and gives himself an argument as the greatest quarterback of all time. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about right here. That's why I'm as nervous as I am these last 2 weeks. To calm myself, I know 2 years ago, the night before the game, I watched the Bears-Packers championship game over again, hoping that was good vibes. Obviously it was for 3.5 quarters. This year I'm going to try something similar. But this year I'm going to try watching the Falcons game because this game is against the Falcons, obviously. So the Tramon Williams pick-6 game we were just talking about, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try and watch the Falcons and the Packers divisional round game from a few years ago and see what happens that night, even though I already know the final score from that game. I've got my first baseball practice of the season in a gym. Since, Jason, you asked how the hell am I practicing in the snow? In a gym on Saturday. So I have 3.5 hours of my time cooked up there. But there's really no calming the nerves. I've got anybody who's been around me, Frankie specifically, can tell you I've been probably pretty unbearable this week because since Monday at about 2 o'clock, it's gone from excited about beating Dallas to nervous about beating the Falcons because this team is special for a lot of reasons, and I think that they're going to be Super Bowl champions, and that kind of ruins my next portion of this segment, but the next segment of this show. But that's what I think, and to calm the nerves, that's what I'm going to try and do. So I just spoiled my prediction, so I'm going to finish my reason here. Jason, the next part of this show is the prediction. Who's going to win? And we're going to do baseball does like a championship series MVP. So I want to do like who's going to win the game and who's going to be the most important player on offense and defense for the team that you're picking to win. So I just said, I can't say all that stuff that I just said to you guys and then pick the Falcons. The Packers, 37-30. The offensive MVP of the game, Erin freaking Rodgers. How do you go anywhere else? I think, I mentioned earlier the X factors of these games. You could talk about Ty Montgomery as a guy that could be on the ground. They can catch passes out of the backfield and do some things that way. But the reality of this game is it comes down to the quarterback. It comes down to a guy that I think is one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play. It comes down to a guy who I think is the best quarterback in football right now. I would take him over anyone. I think he's the greatest quarterback in history of the Green Bay Packers, regardless of what happens. I don't think it's particularly close either, with all due respect to Bart Starr and Brett Favre when I say those things. Aaron Rodgers is going to be the offensive MVP of this game because the Packers are going to score 37 points based on my prediction. The defensive MVP, while I have them giving up 30 points, you could almost argue nobody, but we talked a little bit about it earlier. He's played in one Super Bowl and lost. It was his birthday yesterday, and he's 4 quarters away from another trip to the Super Bowl, and you're talking about a guy who has a chance to kind of enter beast mode and ruin a game. He's a Hall of Famer. He's still got some gas left in the tank. You saw it a little bit against the Giants and a little bit against the Cowboys too, but I think that you have a chance here to see Julius Peppers give one more performance for the ages, because you mentioned earlier, Jason, this might be Julius Peppers' last best chance to get to a Super Bowl. This might be if the Packers lose, knock on wood, this might be his last NFL game. He's 37 years old. He says he hasn't put thought into retirement yet. He's not as effective as he used to be. The Packers have limited his snaps. This is the moment they limited his snaps for. My defensive MVP of this game is going to be Julius Peppers. So I'm going with 2 captains, Aaron Rodgers and Julius Peppers. The Packers win 37-30 to move on to Super Bowl 51. But I'm throwing a curveball on the AFC side of things because I know on Sunday I said the New England Patriots. I'm going with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know. I know a lot of people are just going to say Brady against the Steelers always works out that way. Dick LeBeau's not there anymore. It's a different defense. It's a faster defense. The Patriots looked very beatable last week. I don't buy into the Mike Tomlin video giving them extra motivation. I don't think the Patriots offense is very scary without Rob Gronkowski. I think the Steelers can shut down their running game. I think they can get after Brady enough. And I think that Ben Roethlisberger has enough guys on his side with Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown to score enough points. I like the Steelers to go in on the road. And I like both road teams this weekend. I like the Packers and Steelers in a rematch of Super Bowl 45 in Super Bowl 51. So I'm going with Green Bay and Pittsburgh, but the important one that you guys want to know about is Green Bay. So, Jason, I've talked for damn near an hour. Please shut me up. Who do you got? Who's your offensive defensive guy for this game?
I'm not even going to tell you all of the amazing things I was able to accomplish during your explanation of how you're going to calm your nerves during a game, as well as your prediction. Jacob, I always appreciate it because I get just as much housework done as I do talking about Packers content on this show, and you're the best for it. No, I joke. I was listening to that whole thing because you did resonate with me when I failed to remember that you did recall that Aaron Rodgers drew that play up in the sand, that last play against the Cowboys in our last show, and I failed to recall that. So I do apologize because your content is absolutely fabulous, and I do mean it. You're obviously my co-host and my homie, so I want to give you a big shout-out there. And I was paying attention to everything that you had to say. So I think we talked about it last week. I'm not flipping my pick. I did pick the Cowboys. I was the only one on Cheesehead TV that did pick the Dallas Cowboys. I was wrong. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm not betting against number 12 again. I'm going with the Green Bay Packers. I don't have a final score for you. I do think it's going to be in the 40s. At least the Packers will be in the 40s. And the MVPs and the players of the game, not to bore the heck out of you, but at this point, who else on offense could you possibly pick to be the MVP? It could end up being somebody else. I have a hard time believing it's not going to be Aaron Charles Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is locked in. He's assumed the leadership role of this team. The story of this team, this Packers team, if they get to the Super Bowl, if they're able to somehow get there and even win the big game, the story of this season is going to be far and above, and I don't think I'm being a prisoner of the moment. The other two Super Bowls that I've been able to witness the Packers win in my lifetime, which were Super Bowl 31 with Favre, Reggie White, Leroy Butler, Antonio Freeman, Ron Wolf, Mike Holmgren, when they beat the Patriots and Bill Parcells, or 2010 when they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers after backing into the playoffs and going on a road rage and beating three great teams on the road. So I got the Packers beating the Falcons. You know, you made a good point about Pittsburgh and New England, Jacob, because, you know, I've been taking the Patriots this whole time. I said the Patriots are going to win. I'm going to stick with them because they're at home and it's New England, and it's just one of those things where it's like if I can't bet against Rodgers, I got to use the same logic in saying I don't want to bet against Bill Belichick and Tom Brady at home again. I mean, I think this is their fifth or sixth straight AFC championship game that they've been to. I mean, you want to talk about a spoiled fan base. I mean, it's unreal how many games that they've played and how many chances they've had to go to the biggest game of the year. So I got to go with the home team. But you mentioned Ben Roethlisberger. You mentioned Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. I mean, Le'Veon Bell, I'm watching highlights of him this week because, like I said, I've been laid up watching a lot of football highlights. And Le'Veon Bell runs and plays the running back position unlike any running back I've ever seen in my life. And that includes Barry Sanders. That includes Emmitt Smith. He's just an incredible, transcendent talent at the position right now. And we all know that running backs have a short shelf life, so maybe next year he comes back and he's not the same player, and this was a very special year for him. And, you know, he pulls a Jamal, what was his name with the Ravens back in the early 2000s? Jamal Lewis. You know who Jamal Lewis, who had a couple of amazing seasons and all of a sudden just kind of fell off the map. But for those 2 years, he absolutely dominated and owned the running back position. So the Steelers have a great chance to go in there and pull off the upset and be the team that goes on to the Super Bowl. And if everything shakes out the way that we're picking it, and that does happen, then you've got a rematch of Super Bowl 45 on tap in Houston, and Pittsburgh's going to be out looking for blood, trying to avenge the loss to the Packers the last time, and they want to get that seventh Super Bowl and really stamp their legacy as a team that's got the most Super Bowl victories by at least 2. So, but I'm going with the Patriots. I'm going to stick with New England. So I think it's going to be Packers and Patriots, and I think it's going to be a special day on Sunday. We're going to have a lot to celebrate. Packers somehow pull it off. You know, on defense, I've been talking about Ladarius Gunter. I said Gunter's primed to make a big play, so I need to put my money where my mouth is, and I need to pick Ladarius Gunter to be the guy who's going to be the defensive MVP, right? Well, I'm not. During your description, and it had nothing to do with anything specifically that you said, Jacob, but during your description, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, okay, defense. What do I think is going to happen here? And who do I think is going to step up and have a huge game? And I had a flashback to last season in Arizona against the Cardinals. And who is going to be the Robin to Ladarius Gunter's Batman in terms of trying to cover Julio Jones? It's going to be the first-time Pro Bowl safety, Clinton Dix. So I'm taking Clinton Dix to be the defensive MVP. I think he balls out. He had some big plays against Seattle in the NFC Championship game as a rookie. Could have had a huge game play that would have ended the game. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. He's 2 years smarter. He's had a great season. He's made some interceptions. I don't care how badly thrown those balls were. When the opportunity arose, he made the plays. So I'm going with Clinton Dix as my defensive MVP. I think we're in for a special Sunday, and can't wait to be doing a show. We're going to do one either way, but I can't wait to be doing a show celebrating the biggest win since we started doing this show, Jacob.
That it would be. There will be a show either way, and I can guarantee another thing on my end. Either way, there will be some form of tears, whether they are of joy or of agony. There were in 2010 when they won. There were in 2014 when they lost. Action-packed show tonight, guys. Thank you for listening for 2 hours. That was great. That was fun. Hopefully we have a few more shows talking about a special win, sending them to the Super Bowl, and a couple more wins with a 5th Lombardi Trophy coming back to Titletown, USA. But that will do it for today's show. Be sure to check out PackersTalk.com for all your latest Packers news and podcasts. Follow the show on Twitter. We are at Packer Pulse. You can follow me personally. I am at Jacob Westendorf. You can follow Jason. He is at Jason Perone. Want to thank our guests, Justis Mosqueda and Erin Underwood, both of Bleacher Report. You can follow their work personally. Justis Mosqueda is at JUMOSQ, and Erin Underwood is at Erin Underwood, as she said on the show. Thank you guys for listening in. Want to thank our sponsors as well. That's Ticket King. No more home games this year, but home games next year, obviously. Grab your tickets. It's a stone's throw from the stadium. Walk in, grab your tickets, go inside. Cheer on the Pack. Thank you guys for listening. As I said last week, nobody's underdogs, okay? Nobody's underdogs. They're going to go in the Georgia Dome. Jason and I both like the Packers, and they're going to the Super Bowl. Packers are going to beat the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday and go to the Super Bowl. As Josh Sitton said after the largest comeback in franchise history at Jerry World a few years ago, just believe. Just believe. That's what I'm going to do the next couple days. Okay, just believe, and we'll see how everything shakes out. But hoping that we can talk to you guys a couple more times, hopefully with a big celebration talking about a Packers and either Patriots or Steelers Super Bowl. But thank you guys for listening all season long. Hopefully we got a few more shows on tap for you. But thank you for listening to Pulse of the Pack.
Run that damn table.
Yes, sir.
Pulse of the Pack podcast.
Do you want to experience the thrill of a Packers game at Lambeau Field? If so, be sure to get your game tickets from the longtime trusted source in Wisconsin, Ticket King.